wanted to jump into more of on the marketplaces side too. And since you have, advised quite a few marketplaces following that, I wanted to jump into, maybe what your experience is, advising them on growth and maybe some, some kind of like consistent themes you've seen across them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big topic, and I'm happy to, if there's specific questions, I'm happy to go in a little bit more. I mean, I've made a few investments in B2B marketplaces at Greylock, and then I'm familiar. We have other consumer marketplaces in our portfolio, and I'm close to them and stuff. So I think there are some commonalities across them. But I will say, like with B2B, it ends up being at the stage we invest. Some of these are seed, some are Series A. Like it tends to be a fairly different set of challenges. But I do think now it's the lens I look at them through now is like understanding basically like, topics like how do you measure liquidity in marketplaces? What are the, growth loops? A bunch of like the questions that I think, have already been like widely covered by investors who like invest in marketplaces. But that's different than actually when you're inside of one of these things. Like, what do you, how do you actually architect growth? And actually, one of the smartest people on this topic I would point to is Gustav, who's a friend who's over at Airbnb. We would get our teams together back when he was at Airbnb. Now he's at YC, but when I was at Tilt and he was at Airbnb. And I think what was always interesting to me, they basically deployed all the teams that were working on growth there were like product teams first. And so I remember, if anyone's focused on like referrals here, like they have some of the best content out there. I remember going to one of their meetups where Ivan Kerrigan, who was he launched like Dropbox's referral program. He did the talk like with Gustav, and like they shared like that basically both our referral programs at Tilt and then at Stitch Fix like were heavily influenced by the stuff they talked about. But like they continue to squeeze, that was an amplifier on everything else that they did on growth. And so I was always like struck by how they built a team around that, but it wasn't just like a project. It was like a ongoing team focused on like this one kind of component of growth that just ended up being an accelerant to everything else they did. And so again, I've talked about the topic of referrals. I tend to think most companies have more juice to squeeze there than they realize. But what was interesting is as I got to know Airbnb better, like they were also doing, I mean, Booking has like the amount they spend on marketing is insane. And so Airbnb was kind of playing in that same zone. And like the teams around that were product teams first. It wasn't marketers as much as it was like PMs and engineers actually working to deploy like ad spend like programmatically at scale. And so I always felt like that was quite interesting. In their marketing tech group, there was a guy, Dimitri, there that was really smart on this stuff. But so those are a little bit more tactical. I think taking a step up, I mean, the stuff I would harp on is like the importance of actually understanding and developing your growth model like earlier on. I think I've talked about this before. Lenny Rachitsky was also at Airbnb, and then Dan Hockenmeyer, who's a buddy who helps companies on this stuff. He was at Thumbtack. They built Dan has built like a practice around this stuff, and that's like it's again if you're too early, sometimes it can be like almost a frustrating exercise to do. But I do think like having a sense of how the different levers in your business, like how to prioritize them, and also like where the synergies are, I think is one of the most important things one could do early on to make sure you're like marching in the right direction. And so, I think a lot of you could tell when a company has some sense of that versus like when they don't. But ultimately, I guess the last thing I would say is usually as an investor, the most important thing I look for in these businesses are like, what's going on with the cohorts and how are they trending? And it's not like it needs to be some absolute number. But what ideally what you want to see is like some group of people, both on the supply and the demand side, who are intensely engaged. And I think like that's a strong predictor of almost everything else. And it's okay if it's not the right fit for a bunch of people early on, like over time, with liquidity, you would expect that to improve. But there should be some people who are like actually hacking, who find like this marketplace so potentially groundbreaking to them that they're willing to like, overcome product challenges or lack of liquidity in certain areas or whatever, just to make it work for them. And that generally shows up in the cohort metrics. And early on, I look for that signal for sure. And sometimes you actually need to like get on calls with users to like understand that. But that's yeah, a few scattered thoughts, but I'll stop there.